Excellencies, because I'm assuming there are a number of excellencies here, Madam Consular Saib al-Houthi, Deputy Chief of Mission of the Sultanate of Oman, distinguished guests. It's an honor to be with you all here today. My name is Majid Al Khalili. I'm the director of Sultan Qaboos Cultural Center. Thank you for joining us and welcome. Now, originally, I was supposed to introduce our dear guest speaker, Dr. Joseph Kéchichian, and I've had a lengthy introduction. However, it seems that our dear friend here and his friend, Dr. John Duke Anthony, both of whom are true friends of Oman, will take on that honor. But before I pass the floor, I'd like to share a few words. Dr. Kéchichian, sir, we have never met in person, but you have taught me in so many ways. I have read your books more since 1995, Oman's Independent Foreign Policy. And for that, I will always be grateful, from a student to a teacher. In the Arab world, we say, قم للمعلم وفه التبجيل كاد المعلم أن يكون رسولا, which means, let me translate quickly, arise and honor or revere your teacher, for your teacher is but a step away to prophecy. No pressure, Dr. Kéchichian. And as far as the mentor of us all, Dr. Anthony Duke, you've been a mentor to us all for a long time. Your wisdom and your guidance has helped us and shaped so many of our decisions for a long time. I know I am not supposed to talk about you here, but there may be some people here who don't know you as much as we do. So let me just say a few things about Dr. John Anthony Duke. He served as the founding president and chief executive officer of the National Council on U.S. Arab Relations for more than 4 decades. Dr. Anthony was the only American to have been invited to each of the Gulf Cooperation Council ministerial and heads of state summits from the GCC's inception in 1981 through 2019. There are so many books I could name here. I'm just going to name a few for the sake of time. Arab States of the Lower Gulf, People, Politics and Petroleum, the Middle East, Oil, Politics and Development, Historical and Cultural Legacy of the Sultanate of Oman. There are far too many awards and honors that have been bestowed upon you, including the ones from the King of Morocco. I can go on and on, but for the sake of time, we need to stop, and I need you, sir. Well, I'm supposed to say the floor is yours, but I'm going to just say Zoom is yours. Thank you. Dr. John Anthony. Can
you hear me?
I can hear you now. Brilliant.
Good. Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Majid. What a privilege and an honor and a pleasure it is to be part of this event with the esteemed participants and attendees who, for the most part, probably will be anonymous, but they will inform our knowledge and our understanding with their questions. It is my privilege to say a few words about Dr. Joseph Kéchichian, who I've known for more than 4 decades. 40, of course, we know, Arba'in Sana is an important year in the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and in the lives of Muslims worldwide. And I'm pleased and honored to have served the Majlis Al-Watani Li'alakat Arab wa Amriki, the National Council on U.S. Arab Relations, for 40 decades before, for reasons of health, I had to step aside, not step down, not step up, but when Dr. Majid says the floor is yours, I like to think that the ceiling is all of ours. That we use these kinds of metaphors and that none of us can fully reach the height to which we aspire, to which our parents try to educate and train us to climb to the heights that our coaches, our teachers, our mentors, and our tormentors have tried to put us in the right direction. So to be part of an Omani component of this, what an honor in particular. It's been my privilege to be a guest in your country for 53 times. My first visit was in 1971 when still the paved roads were only 6 miles there, and the situation was so strikingly contrastive to what it has become in the years since then. Now, Dr. Kéchichian is going to be focusing on a fraction of those years since His Majesty, late Majesty Sultan Qaboos assumed power in July of 1970. And that in itself is an awesome enough task because of the shoes in which he is filling there. But he's amply qualified, more than amply qualified, than any scholar in the Western world of whom I'm aware. And let me give you a few reasons as to why this is the case. If you take the following scale of wisdom and knowledge, starting with information, he is as informed, if not more informed, than more non-Omanis than any I can think of, with the exception of one, two, or three, and even those are exceptions in quotation marks. But from that information, he has provided insight. You cannot provide insight that's legitimate and credible and valid if you do not have valid information. And those two, the information and the insight, are key to our understanding. And our understanding is not to be confused with education. But it is absolutely necessary if you aspire to have education. So here we are speaking about information, insight, knowledge, understanding. Dr. Kéchichian excels in all four of these with respect to Oman. And having all four of these, he is gifted with another skill and character trait from a scholar's perspective, and that is his ability to analyze incisively, concisely, and objectively. Now, how is he able to do this more, better, more effectively than the rest of us? It's because of a multitude of factors, but they include the following. One, he's from the region. He is a son of the soil. He was raised in Beirut. He has 7 or 8 languages. There are only a handful of Western non-Omani, non-Arab, non-Muslim scholars that I can think of who are as gifted linguistically as he is. So this provides him with tools and a toolkit to mine and to dig the earth for clues that the rest who are not so linguistically gifted are not so able. In terms of what he's able to do from that, he has lived in the region. He does live in the region. He continues to live in the region. And this gives him the cutting edge of being empirical in his analysis. Most of the people who write about Oman have written maybe 2, 3 books. Maybe they have 2 or 3 languages other than their mother tongue, but they don't have 8. And they don't have 18 books under their belt, as Dr. Kéchichian does, with 2 more on the way. So these are one-of-a-kind types of skills that he brings to the task of 5 years of His Majesty Sultan Haitham that I know of no other Western scholar brings to the table. Now, what this gives him is a degree of self-confidence. To do what? To challenge the prevailing conventional wisdom, to challenge what passes for established thought, to challenge what goes for acknowledged trust, which is misacknowledged and misguided and misinformed, there to challenge what goes for presumed consensual knowledge and understanding and information and insight. He's able to do this with a degree of confidence that few others have. And indeed, few others would even take on the task because they don't have the confidence, they don't have the tools that Dr. Kéchichian has. He brings to his toolkit some dozen interviews with His Majesty Sultan Sayyid Haitham. He's had as many interviews with most of the skilled Omanis who are tasked with educating us outsiders, us non-Omanis. And I've never forgotten, and I will not ever forget, that I'm an outsider. I have no pretensions to being an Omani, to being a scholar born and raised from the inside, like Dr. Majid Al Khalili, Dr. Hibba there, and the ambassador of Oman, and Sayyid Badr bin Hamid bin Hamoud Al Busaidi, and the late Majesty Sultan Qaboos bin Said bin Taimur. So those of us who are lacking in such skills have to rely upon, depend upon scholars like Joseph Kéchichian. He did his PhD at the University of Virginia, my native state of Virginia. He's been in and out of policymaking circles, decision-making circles, information circles through scholars in the media and lay people who've made a career of being informed and responsibly informed there, and also with academics, of which he's been one himself. He's taught at the University of Virginia, the University of California at Los Angeles. He's been a scholar consultant for the RAND Corporation, which produced this magnificent volume over my right shoulder, the viewer's left shoulder, and looking on the shelf behind me, I'm going to point to it, Oman in History. This is a major work, as is a work by Dr. Kéchichian and his colleagues on Oman and the world there, which 30-some years later is still as valid and must-reading as it was when it first appeared. I will end on a note of what I admire him for the most. And this is a word he's used quite frequently. He's used the word loyalty. But before loyalty comes trust. And before trust comes empathy. If we go back to Ibn Khaldun, we look at who are the people that we trust the most with their secrets, with sensitive information, with so-called compartmental information.
Right.
They are arguably the people like Dr. Majid and Hibba, who grew up with their relatives, their kinfolk there. They know each other's strength. They know each other's weaknesses. They know each other's senses of humor, how serious they are, and whether to trust them or not to trust them, whether they'll be loyal, whether they'll not be loyal. Non-Omanis cannot, by definition, be this way. But he comes as close as any non-Omani to enjoying the trust, the respect, the admiration, the appreciation, even the adoration of scores of Omanis. All you have to do is look at the notes of his book there, and the documentation underscores, italicizes, neonizes,
Indeed.
capitalizes
Indeed. Indeed. Thank you. Thank you, Dr.
his legitimacy.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Majid.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for those kind of work. Thank you for these kind remarks. And Dr. Joseph, sir, Dr. Joseph Kéchichian, are you with us? You could begin.
I am with you. I am with you. Thank you. Thank you very much for those kind words, both Dr. Al Khalili and Dr. Anthony. I really appreciate the invitation, first of all. I wish it were in person. at the Sultan Qaboos Center. But given the circumstances of the weather, this is the best we can do, and I'm sure that we will have future opportunities to get together. Now, what I'm going to do this evening is I'm going to provide a preliminary assessment of the making of a ruler, Haitham bin Tariq, in the Omani throne for the past 5 years. I do not pretend to present in the next 45 minutes to 1 hour a complete assessment, but I'm going to concentrate on several important points, and then we'll open it up for discussion. And of course, I'll be more than happy to answer questions you may have. So here it goes. Stricken by an incurable cancer, Sultan Qaboos bin Said Al Said, who died in Muscat on 10 January 2020, remained the master strategist that he was, and without an heir apparent to replace him, the late ruler devised his succession so carefully in order to avoid the royal family past mischiefs that regrettably were features of Omani rulership for centuries. What followed was a dignified process as the royal family council immediately opened the sealed envelope containing Qaboos's own nomination for his successor, Sayyid Haitham bin Tariq bin Taymur al Said. The endorsement bestowed on the new ruler the authority and blessings of the late Sultan, as that espousal commanded the overwhelming respect and obedience of what historically has been a fractious land divided on tribal and religious grounds. The succession process's swiftness and efficiency surprised some observers who believe that Haytham's brothers, Brigadier General Sayyid As'ad, who was a former Royal Army of Oman officer, or Rear Admiral Sayyid Shihab bin Tariq, who served as the commander of the Royal Navy of Oman, stood far better chances to succeed Qaboos, even if Haytham was the more natural selection. An observer even anticipated a void where, of course, there was none, and there would be none. In the event, the seal of approval that accompanied this appointment eliminated any and all opportunities for internal dissension. Qaboos' state funeral displayed full unity as Haytham's brother demonstrated solidarity and support. Senior members of the armed forces were likewise deferential, concluding that they stood a far better chance to mold a diplomat to their liking rather than deal with two seasoned military officers. Equally important was the backing that the new Sultan received from Omanis, whose expectations ran high that a new government would deliver on the economic diversification which for so long eluded Qaboos' planners. Even The Economist claimed that the Sultan Haitham had little economic nous and was not known for his managerial savvy. The Economist of London added, the Ministry of Culture, which he ran, was seen as dysfunctional, which was unfair, an unfair conclusion, and of course, incorrect evaluation. Much like his predecessor, who assumed the burden of power when so much needed to be accomplished over such a short period of time, Haitham bin Tariq shouldered his burden with dignity. He once confided in one of our numerous conversations that he would bear the onus of power with mercy, though he stressed that he did not seek the post, but was ready to lead in the traditions of Al Said rulers. The weight of authority, including that of absolute rule, fell on his broad shoulders in early 2020, and only time will tell whether Haitham will reign with his predecessor's gusto, even if his personality is entirely different. As the 15th Al Saud ruler to assume authority over the Sultanate, his innate capabilities were skillfully developed, his judgments well attuned to the needs of his nation, his legendary patience far more pragmatic than generally known, while his intrinsic endurance aptitudes nearly guaranteed solid returns. What was his record to date? Shortly after his accession to the throne, Sultan Haitham delivered several televised speeches. The first on 11 January 2020 that documented his oath to the nation, and the second on 23 February 2020, that is at the end of a 40 days official mourning period for his predecessor. The second declaration, which outlined his comprehensive strategic vision, stood out as a remarkable innovation. According to a high-ranking Omani official, the speech was drafted and written by the Sultan himself, notwithstanding advice from various aides he may have received. In other words, His Majesty's 23 February 2020 pronouncement to the nation was a personal manifesto of sorts, in which the newly elevated ruler sought to reassure the defense and security establishment, as well as conservative elements in society that continued to play critical, even if indirect, governance roles. Remarkably, the sovereign placed great emphasis on education, on improving job prospects for both men and women anxious to enter the private sector. He pledged to reduce the national debt, to increase government revenues, and encourage economic diversification. While all of these concerns were also shared by his predecessor, Sultan Qaboos's long illness from 2014 to 2020 relegated various issues to the background, which the country could not afford to do, though this was the writ of monarchies. Haitham emphasized the welfare of the population and pledged to adopt policies that would prioritize its interests. Importantly, Muscat concentrated on the emerging hydrogen economy to help overcome its hydrocarbon dependencies, even if oil and gas provided the bulk of public revenues, despite much vaunted efforts to boost non-oil GDP. In addition to new industries such as hydrogen, Oman expanded its substantial investments on infrastructure, all to boost tourism, believed to hold employment promises. Consequently, the government's fiscal position deteriorated sharply during the COVID pandemic, as the budget deficit reached 18% of GDP in 2020 and debt was almost 70% of GDP. Mercifully, and this will stand as one of the greatest accomplishments during the past 5 years, mercifully, the debt burden was reduced substantially, falling to less than 33% in 2024 of GDP, of course. A remarkable accomplishment by any standard. Now, where Muscat managed to record noticeable progress was in education. And I want to focus on this very important point because of the emphasis that His Majesty made in his 23 February presentation to 2020. Education was always Sultan Haitham's priorities, and he presided over cultural activities during his tenure as Minister of Heritage and Culture. And according to Dr. Madiha bint Ahmad al-Shaybani, the erudite Minister of Education, one of the most sophisticated ministers in the country, who served as at UNESCO before she was entrusted with this very critical ministry. The government allocated huge sums of money for education purposes. And although the financial crisis that hit the Sultanate affected the ministry's 5-year plans, we are currently in the 9th iteration, it included several innovations as it introduced online learning in the aftermath of the pandemic that severely limited access. One of the things that the ministry did, which was really remarkable, is that it purchased thousands and thousands and thousands of tablets and distributed to students throughout the Sultanate in order for them to be able to have access to information, knowledge, analysis, and education online. Like the Sultan, Minister Al-Shaybani further emphasized in a conversation that I had with her last year that while education was neglected ties to the country's business needs in the past, and which partially explain the heavy price paid for shortcomings, she said, we are actively pursuing new alliances with the business community to remedy such deficiencies. and added, "The Sultanate has an incredibly rich history, and we are committed to teaching our traditions, but we must also evolve. Towards that end, we want our children to assume their responsibilities just like our ancestors did, which means that Omanis who traded across oceans and were successful business leaders could continue along such path." Muscat's plan for the future remained ambitious, as additional investments in education were planned between now and 2035, including sharp increases in vocational education. And there is no need to be ashamed of that. Vocational education is critical and must be encouraged at every level possible. And rather, the Sultanate did not separate regular education from vocational education. Rather, it adopted an inclusive approach, seldom outsourcing vocational education needs, precisely to build on strong roots. And I can go on and on to give you the details, but as important as education, the Sultan divulged his attention to protect various rights, including freedom of expression, which was astonishing to say the least. This was yet another sign of accountability, as the ruler issued 3 decrees on 7 April 2020, committing the Sultanate of Oman to join a number of international human rights conventions, even if Muscat opposed some of the provisions in each one of them. It adhered to the 2006 International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance. It accepted to join the 1984 Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading Treatment of Punishment, despite some reservations. And it also joined the 1966 International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. While some of the country's reservations on several critical human rights conventions raised questions about the Sultanate's commitments, the mere fact that accession was ensured meant that the existing regulations were increasingly adapting to global standards. My first conclusion, therefore, is the following. It will be safe to reiterate that now a Haitham doctrine has emerged in early 2020, one that valued the Omani citizen, that respected the latter's fundamental rights, that clearly went beyond privileges granted subjects and committed to reign to be friends to all, enemy to none. In other words, this was not merely a pledge to manage change by seeking consensus among stakeholders or even record steady progress on various domestic and foreign policies, but rather a fresh approach, a fresh scheme to introduce radical changes, even if pragmatism dictated that inevitable evolutionary initiatives would be adopted. Haitham seemed to have chosen a new direction, one that may literally redraw the parameters of Sultani authority. Of course, it's too soon to confirm whether this design would endure, though the mere fact that it was adopted and proclaimed was epochal. Now, I'm gonna skip over a lot of material here that I had prepared in terms of the economic progress that the Sultan initiated. I mentioned some of them, and I want to go straight to the foreign policy direction that I see as a new foreign policy. If during the question and answer period, people would like to ask me questions about various economic issues, I'll be more than happy to answer them, of course. The objective is to secure foreign direct investments. Certainly, it was a priority for the late Sultan Qaboos bin Said. Sultan Qaboos abhorred asking for investments from neighboring countries, even if he resorted to asking inevitably for some assistance at the beginning in the 1970s from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and others. Qaboos always managed to camouflage such assistance under the security rubric, which the late ruler could easily justify on account of the country's strategic position as well as its intrinsic expertise on the matter. To be sure, Sultan Haitham reigned over a strategically located territory as well, and though he was and is a diplomat as well as a business-savvy ruler, he did not have the luxury of defense expertise, and there is no shame in that because he's not a military officer. Mercifully, he relied on seasoned military experts on these matters, including his brothers, Asad and Shahab. As stated earlier, he went out of his way to secure the backing of the military, vetting promotions carefully, appointing reliable officers to key positions, visiting military bases with his sons, thereby improving their prospective credentials as well, and otherwise assumed the commander-in-chief role with gusto. He visited various military bases, and he is obviously preparing his sons, both Sayyid Tayazid and Sayyid Bil Arab, to actually fill in this role in the future. When Haitham bin Tariq assumed the burden of rulership, he pledged to stay the course on Oman's foreign relations, to follow a policy of peaceful coexistence with nations, good neighborliness, non-interference in the internal affairs of others, respect for countries' sovereignty and international cooperation in various spheres. To be sure, Sultan Haitham, imitated his predecessor as he avoided formal occasions such as the GCC and League of Arab States summits during his first 5 years on the throne, though he increased his visits to neighboring countries. In fact, the difference between Sultan Qaboos and Sultan Haitham on this point is a major one, as Sultan Haitham has been visiting just about all of the Gulf countries several times since his accession. And he has also been to a number of European countries and visited several of them. So the question to ask is the following, really. What were the key or the new foreign policy objectives of the Sultan after 2020? And was Sultan Haitham in pursuit of a new direction? One of the best examples of this new direction was the Sultanate's relationship with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, as past tensions, which chiefly arose because of Muscat's independent working association with Iran, were no longer preponderant. Sultan Haitham's 2021 visit to the kingdom, the first foreign country he visited after he acceded to the throne, recalibrated bilateral relations and further consolidated friendly ties between the two monarchies in the post-Qaboos era. In fact, and ironically, the Omani leader's visit to Neom, the mega city project on Saudi Arabia's Red Sea coast, on what was his first trip, as I said, after January 2020, telegraphed a very clear message. Muscat would henceforth pursue far more pragmatic measures as it positioned itself within the GCC, both as an interlocutor of some weight, especially on Yemeni and Iranian affairs, as well as become a leading voice of conciliation. Indeed, the Yemen conflict, which Saudi Arabia wanted to see wind down, was one of the key reasons why Riyadh welcomed this overture, as it strengthened relations with Muscat and overcame the friction of previous years. Oman has played historically a very critical behind-the-scenes role on the Yemen question, much more than people tend to give credit to. We know more about the relationship or behind-the-scenes role that the Sultanate played vis-a-vis Iran, but we sometimes forget that the same approach was also used in Yemen, a critical country, obviously, on the Arabian Peninsula. And there have been a number of meetings held in Muscat between Yemeni and Saudi officials over the past few years. For Sultan Haitham, a strong GCC that was capable of advancing regional economic integration remained a must, and perhaps the only way to attract more investments from Saudi Arabia to boost bilateral trade as well. Let me say a few words also about the fact that, like his predecessor, Sultan Haitham was committed to really promoting the peaceful coexistence and economic integration of all Gulf states, including Iran. Along the same path, Haitham promised that Muscat would continue to assist in resolving disputes peacefully while delivering his inaugural address. The Sultan envisaged a position of an efficient third-party back channel between the West and Arab states on the one side and the Islamic Republic on the other, which remains in place after all these decades. This was bound to continue, albeit with slight emendations, as Muscat was determined to rely on the GCC alliance to advance its regional goals. Sometimes critics of the Sultanate say that the Omanis are much closer to Iran than they are to Arab countries. This is illogical to begin with because Oman is part of the Arab world. Omanis are Arabs, and you cannot deny their identity. And those who make those kinds of accusations may be coming from a different place. But the fact that you want to have neighborly relations that are correct does not mean that you necessarily agree with everything that they propose. Nevertheless, having said all of this, let me now jump to discussing the important Omani-Western relationships under Sultan Haitham. Precisely to focus on the new foreign policy direction preferred by the ruler. To be sure, relations with Western powers represented challenges too, though Haitham was perceived as an unmistakable ally by both the United States and the United Kingdom. I want to repeat this because this is so important. Relations with Western powers represented challenges, no doubt, though Sultan Haitham was perceived as an unmistakable ally by both the United States and the United Kingdom. The Duqm facilities were valued to both Washington and London, which normally deployed significant assets in the Gulf region, but which lacked support facilities close to but outside the Straits of Hormuz. The agreements that exist between the Sultanate of Oman and the United States on the one hand and the United Kingdom on the other to develop further the Duqm facilities is just remarkable. Those of you who are interested in this question, we might discuss it during the question and answer period as well. The deployments there are significant. How about the next 5 years? Where are we going? If Sultan Qaboos was a structuralist who for 50 years built on the country's foundations, added fresh elements to his governance methods, and introduced necessary changes, Sultan Haitham stood as a functionalist who wished to see the results that development brought to Omanis trickle down at every level. That, I think, is his measure for progress, which his government ushered in during the past 5 years. The purpose is to create wealth, to show his subjects that hard work accomplished miracles, and that they were entitled to enjoy the fruits of their labor. Haitham was and is a different kind of leader, focusing on social matters, keen to tap the Sultanate's intellectual potential, draw its youth to work well and play even better, which is one reason why his own sons are involved in so many activities. Haitham believed that all voices must be heard in society, something that stood out throughout the Gulf region, though he also accentuated critical norms that made Omanis who they were. It was for that reason that he introduced concrete innovations in January 2020 when he changed the state basic law and granted citizens and residents living in Oman freedom of expression and opinion. He removed a law that allowed the state to monitor private phone conversations, social media or postal correspondence, and granted the freedom to practice religious rites according to recognized customs, provided these did not violate the public order or contradict morals. There are, of course, exceptions to this rule, especially when known terrorists are involved. So, therefore, the state has no authority to monitor them. But it's not a blanket monitoring of everyone's telephone conversations. These were epochal changes that promised to alter the Omani scene for the better, though Qaboos must be given credit also for setting the stage so well for Sultan Haitham. In the past 5 years, have been relatively successful. If they have been relatively successful, there are a number of reasons for them. As I said a few moments ago, the Sultan's functionalist preferences, but also because Haitham knew how confident his subjects were in their own identities. Throughout the ages, Omanis from all walks of life practiced what they preached. They acted with utmost tolerance and welcomed others in their midst. It was not nirvana, but as Muhammad bin Sa'id al-Ma'mari, who was Minister of Religious Affairs, reminded me in person, Omanis fought amongst themselves, but never on a sectarian basis, end quote. The Minister of Endowment and Religious Affairs, who holds a doctorate in Islamic studies from Germany, and of course speaks fluent German as well, stressed how important knowledge of others was and how much he and his fellow citizens owed the late Sultan Qaboos for his vision of religious tolerance. I cannot emphasize this point enough. This is something which we have to bear in mind every time we talk about this Muslim country in the Gulf region, that in fact Omanis do practice religious tolerance. And that's something to keep in mind all the time. We stand at the crossroads of history, he told me, and built on our sense of justice. We aim high as we reject violence. We abhor terrorism. We practice our principles. We focus on progress and adopt priorities that will empower Omanis in every walk of life, decent and prosperous lives. Now, of course, most of the audience members listening to us know that Omanis practice Ibadi traditions. In the past, this has been used as an excuse to isolate Oman on Omanis because of its minority status. Qaboos taught Omanis to be strong, to build on faith and values, reject extremism, and otherwise become contributing global citizens. All of these conversations that I've had over the years with him and his successor, of course, I've reflected in my writings, both in Oman and the world, and now with the new book on an enduring sultanate. Of course, challenges existed, and inevitably so, and they've adapted to ongoing developments, including being at peace with other sects, enact Ibadi norms to reject political violence everywhere, and remain alert to nefarious influences that could harm future generations. Minister Al-Ma'mari highlighted Oman hoped to unite nations over principles by respecting everyone's religious freedoms. That's what he's talking about. Seeking justice with a majuscule J and applying universal values on which everyone can agree. Now, as I've stated above, Sultan Haitham cemented his family's hold to secure the realm as both of his sons received carefully managed promotions. In stark contrast to the ambiguity that surrounded Qaboos' succession, Haitham brought primogeniture into Omani governments when he appointed Sayyid Thayazin in November 2021, entrusted him with the Ministry of Culture, Sports and Youth in the government, even though the formal decree has not been issued in public. Sayyid Thayazin is assumed to be the heir apparent. Now, in July 2023, the designated heir apparent, as I said, no formal decree has been issued yet, but it is assumed, graduated from the Royal Military Academy at Sandhurst in the 8-week commissioning course in a ceremony that was attended by the ruler as well as his spouse, Sayyida Ahad bin Abdullah bin Hamad al Busaidi, and their son Bil Arab bin Haitham al Said. All of this to boost the family's credentials as much as possible. And they're involved, as I said, in a number of different activities as well. Now, although Muscat is determined to advance its long-term interests at every imaginable level, which is too close, which might be too close for comfort sometimes. Despite Oman's friends to all strategy, the risk of the Yemen war spilling over into Omani region of the Dhofar cannot be neglected. And while Muscat stayed out of the Saudi-led military campaign that began in 2015, the fear that extremist groups could infiltrate from Yemen conflict zones could not be ruled out either. Far worse are the long-term consequences of double standards between developments in the Yemen and those in Gaza after 7 October 2023. I want to share something with you, a conversation that I had with Dr. Khalifa bin Ali al-Harsi, the Undersecretary of Political Affairs at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who told me in an interview, when the West does not bother to secure a mere ceasefire in Gaza, then we should not be surprised by what the Houthis are doing in Yemen. The relationship was quite interesting. Al-Harthi reflected Omani sentiments over the ongoing genocide of the Palestinians as atrocities continued to pile on the hapless nation. We are one leadership and people, he reminded me, as we identify with the view that occupation is wrong and must end. Moreover, Al-Harthi echoed, while we are dead set against what Israel is doing, although there is a ceasefire, it's still ongoing, we do not see any justification for Western, especially US support to Israel. Al-Harthi reiterated that Omanis supported the peace process that the Sultanate's record highlighted, but we cannot in good conscience say that the Palestinians must be isolated and that the Israeli strategy to normalize with Arab countries must occur at any cost. Now, those sentiments were reiterated by others in Oman. Humaid al-Ma'ni, the head of the Global Affairs Department at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and one of Oman's most gifted diplomats, stated the following: Omanis do not accept injustice in the international arena, he stated, adding, we are watching Western deeds, comparing developments in Ukraine and Gaza, and wondering when will Western governments change their multiple standards that cannot possibly continue like this. Al-Mani recalled how the UK and France changed their policies towards Israel from their early October 2023 positions, especially when Israeli atrocities gained momentum. He feared that radical perspectives were growing throughout the world, including the Arab world, and that new generations were no longer accepting egregious behavior. We will see what happens now with the new Trump administration and the pledges that they have made to actually bring peace in the region. Let me conclude with the following. Haitham bin Tariq is a progressive ruler with a conspicuous cogency in both his conversation and his prose, which suggested that he relied on a deep reservoir of learning he could tap at will, something that few seem to notice. His demeanor is permanently poised, always displaying calmness, anxious to avoid controversies, and far more important, choosing pragmatic solutions to better serve his nation. The Sultan's pragmatism was illustrated by several of the decisions he took in the first 5 years in power, when he had to establish his own legitimacy with fiscal pressures and the challenges of the COVID pandemic, usher in multiple reforms, forge new political and economic ties with key Arab Gulf allies, and otherwise avoid being dragged in short-term political gains that lack domestic and regional consensus. This latter point was best illustrated by the decision not to join rush the rush towards the recognition of Israel as part of the Abraham Accords process, which demonstrated biases that resurfaced in late 2023 and early 2024 and is still going on. The Omani ruler believed that peace with Israel was certainly a desirable goal, but that it could not, indeed should not, be granted cheaply. In fact, this cautious and very pragmatic step demonstrated his substantial foreign policy skills in knowing the difference of mediation between the United States and Iran, in contrast with epochal transformations that the Abraham Accords purported to usher in between Arabs and Israelis. In underscoring the distinction, Oman re-emphasized its independent foreign policy that reinforced the Sultanate's strength and further sealed its stability, which strengthened prospects that Muscat would always engage to best serve its national security interests without betraying alliances and partnerships. I think I've spoken too much already, so I will stop here. I thank you all for your attention and excuse the conditions under which we spoke, including my very bad cold, but hopefully I was clear enough. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Can you hear me, everyone? This was tremendous. Thank you. Thank you very much. Expansive, detailed, informative, delivered with passion. It's exactly what we expected. It's exactly what we wanted. We are grateful to you, Dr. Joseph. Thank you, sir. Can I, before I open the doors to questions, I'm not going to try here to give a conclusion to what you have said, but I want to ask you a question that maybe try to ties some of these things together. And let us recall that I am Omani. I grew up under Sultan Qaboos, His Majesty Sultan Qaboos, rahimahullah. I remember the words تعلموا ولو تحت ظل الشجرة, and now we are under His Majesty Sultan Haitham, أطال الله في عمره. If I may, if I recall, Aristotle defined at times a political regime by what it honors. What is it that this political regime honors? And from what I have studied, from what I have read, from knowing my own country, from what I have heard, what I have observed, the one word that keeps constantly coming back again and again, describing, be it Sultan Qaboos rahimahullah, or Sultan Haitham, or the Omani character itself, is moderation. Moderation, moderation, moderation. One, where does that come from? Two, which is probably relates more to your foreign policy expertise, is moderation under our age now? Is it desirable? Is it even possible with all the things that are happening in the region and at large beyond that?
That's an excellent question. Moderation in the regime comes from the Ibadi traditions. In the new book, A Sultanate That Endures, I've devoted 2 full chapters on this very question because it's so essential. And both Sultan Qaboos and Sultan Haitham have actually drawn their strength from this tradition, the tradition of the Omani people. I remember a conversation that I had with His Majesty a long time ago. You know, as readers of the book will see, and as people who know me can relate to the fact that I have known this individual for almost 4 decades, uh, a huge privilege to me. I've always been struck by his approach to moderation, and I've always tried to figure out where did this come from. And in conversations that I had with the Mufti of the Sultanate a number of times, who taught me more about Ibadism than I could possibly ever know. I mean, I am not a Muslim, I am a practicing Roman Catholic, but I am a student of Islam. And I am very proud that the Mufti took time to explain to me where this all came from. And I think it comes from this approach to accepting others, to becoming tolerant. Moderation is a direct result of tolerance. And there is a message here for all of us, and it reflects in the foreign policy of both the late Sultan Qaboos and now with His Majesty Sultan Haitham.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I'm opening the doors for questions. Anyone has questions, specific questions to Dr. Joseph Kéchichian? Unfortunately, I'm not able to see everyone in here to pinpoint. Please, if you do have a question, do raise your hand. And the administrators of this session will point you. I see here. I can't hear her. Yes, now.
Oh, hello. Sorry, may I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, hi. Thank you, Dr. Joseph. That was wonderful. I've been to Oman and I love the country and I love the soul of the country. I wanted to ask you, in an increasingly divided world where if you're not with us, you're against us. How does and I know you've explained this before, but I just wanted to kind of drill down a bit deeper. How that with Russia, with Oman pivoting a bit towards Russia, from what I'm understanding, increasing trade, I think by almost, from what I was reading, almost double in the last 3 years. How does Oman manage to keep itself so neutral in such a successful way? How does it manage to avoid the pressure and the suspicions when it does pivot to Russia, for example? How does it do that? Especially when you think of, the sanctions against Russia, the increasing sanctions against Russia, the increasing sanctions against Iran. How does it manage to stay economically neutral as well? How does it do that?
Well, it does that through a variety of reasons, and it's not unique in that sense. The other Gulf Cooperation Council are pursuing a similar approach as well. The world has changed, as you said. We are in the post-Cold War era. There is a major war in Europe going on with Russia against Western powers. China is playing an increasingly important role. In fact, most of the Omani and Saudi oil now is sold to China. It is not sold to other countries. And in addition to Russia and to China, I would also add to your list the critical country of India, which also plays an important role for Oman and the other Gulf countries as well. It manages all of this because it wants to be friends with all, enemies with none. Russia is not an enemy. It is not perceived as an enemy. It does not matter that there are public statements that people make left and right, but there is a consistency in foreign policy preferences, and the consistency implies that you cannot break relations unnecessarily. You probably know this since you are interested in Oman, but Oman is the only country in the entire Arab world that has never broken diplomatic relations with anyone, ever. And that is the kind of illustration, that is the kind of record that speaks for itself in a way that no other country can make such a claim on in no other issue. Even at the height of the war for Kuwait after the Iraqi invasion, the Omanis did not break diplomatic relations with Baghdad, and they've always maintained open communication lines. The same with Russia. Sayyid Thayazin has visited Moscow and was welcomed by President Vladimir Putin in a formal ceremony. Why? Simply because it's the kind of behavior that adults engage in. And Oman is an adult.
Thank you, sir. And although I may take an issue with the word pivot to Russia, I think pivot is a bit too strong. Maybe we have relations, diplomatic relations, what have you, but a pivot is a bit too far. Anyone else?
I think I see a question from Dr. Jawdat. Dr. Jawdat, do you want to ask your question or you want me to read it? I'll just read it. Dr. Jawdat says, great presentation, thanks. Would you say a few words on first, the great progress in gender equality, women empowerment? The second part, he's asking about relations with the other global powers, example, Russia and China.
Well, the gender equality is a very rapidly changing development in the Gulf region, not just in Oman, but in Saudi Arabia, in the Emirates, in Qatar, and elsewhere as well. Young people are coming into the workforce, and capable young women want to have a voice in the future. And I've made a reference in my presentation to the Minister of Education, a person that is admirable at every sense. When you sit down and talk with leaders like that, you really begin to appreciate the awareness that they have, not only to have gender equality at the formal level, but to have it ingrained starting early on in the education system, so that young boys and girls grow up respecting each other. I'm always asked this question about jihad in the Arab world, in the Muslim world in general. And people really must understand this concept, but this is an opportunity that I have. And if you give me 1 minute, I'm going to develop it because it really hits at the heart of the matter. The greatest form of jihad is self-control. What you do, you teach young people, both men and women, but especially men, young boys, to teach them to stay away from temptation. That's jihad. And now it's being practiced more and more in several societies in the Gulf, whether it is in Oman, whether it is in Saudi Arabia and elsewhere, where you actually have to have not just the law imposing equality, like women driving in Saudi Arabia, for example, something which Omani women have been doing for decades, but more importantly, to actually have equality at the workforce, in the workplace, but to also have equality at the school level. In several of the visits that I have paid over the years in high schools, I was always impressed by young Omani girls who would stand up in front of me and for 20 minutes give me a PowerPoint presentation that would astound me. That is something which I had not seen in many, many countries, including our own here in the United States, where this is just only beginning to we become aware of these issues. So gender equality is becoming something accepted, and awareness of it is very important. And in the case of of Sultan Haitham and his spouse, you have now you have now an important role that she plays in society and welcomes visitors, goes on trips as necessary, and so on and so forth. On the question of Russia and China, I spoke about Russia earlier on, but let me say a few words about China, which is important. China is an emerging power. It is a global power that we all have got to come to terms with. In Gulf countries, Chinese language instruction now is increasingly popular. More and more young people want to learn to speak, to read and write Chinese. This is good news. Even though the Gulf countries tend to be Eurocentric and emphasis is on English or French sometimes, still there is a new awareness that China is a critical country, that we have to pay attention to it more and more. We can no longer ignore it. There are several hundred Omani students who are learning in China, and there are several hundred Chinese students who are learning in Oman at any given time. So the future relationships cannot but grow.
I would just add one thing quickly. Let us not forget that one of the most capable ambassadors from the GCC to the United States of America for almost, 12, 13, 14 years was Ambassador Hunayna to the Sultanate of Oman. And that is a lady, and that was happening way, way before. Any other questions?
Thanks for adding that.
I think we'll take just people in order. We have a question from Mr. David Fisher. If you can ask your questions, please, sir.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
We can hear you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Dr. Kéchichian. That was a really comprehensive overview. I really enjoyed it. I'm the Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary of State at the State Department for Arabian Peninsula Affairs. So Oman is within my portfolio of countries that we're covering. And I learned much from your presentation, and it provided really valuable context to help myself and my team as we think about how we can strengthen the U.S.-Oman relationship. I mean, Oman was one of the first to was the first country in the region to conclude a treaty of amity and commerce all the way back in 1833. So that the U.S.-Oman relationship dates back to not too far after the founding of the nation of the United States. And so this is a relationship that's very important to us. We particularly appreciate Oman's role over the last years of being a mediator and a facilitator for international agreements, as well as the releases of hostages and wrongfully detained American citizens. And so Oman's influence on the global stage and in the region is really recognized by the United States government and very much appreciated. And of course, Oman is only one of two countries in the region with which we have a free trade agreement dating back, 16 years. What we're trying to do is find ways to further strengthen that relationship between the United States and Oman and the government of Oman, but also the people, and find ways to strengthen academic exchanges, investment in both directions, making use of the FTA. And I think there's a lot of room. There's so much more ahead of us, I think, that we can do. And we look forward to welcoming a new Omani ambassador and hopefully in the near term, and find ways that we can build off the fantastic work that Sabra Al-Houthi has done with us over the past months, and really find ways to take that relationship further. So if I had a question for you, Dr. Kéchichian, it would be, where do you see the opportunities for U.S.-Oman engagement to be further strengthened and intensified? When you look at this range of economic and cultural and people-to-people and diplomatic, where do you think we could build off His Majesty the Sultan's vision for Oman and take advantage of this further intensification of our relationship?
Thank you very much for your question, Mr. Fisher. I, of course, wish you the best of luck because I think that you have been entrusted a very important portfolio, which I'm sure you will successfully manage. I have no doubt about that. And where I see progress in the future, where you can actually build on the legacy that you have inherited, which is unique, by the way, is not to take Oman for granted. This is something very important. Omanis have been loyal to their relationship with our country, with the United States. And it is important for us to appreciate the sacrifices that they have made in the rest of the Arab world, where they have helped us not only to get our hostages out of Iran over the years, several cases, but also to allow the kind of behind the scenes negotiations that you are fully aware of. You can build on that first by not taking them for granted. Second, by actually paying attention to what they have to say, which we, I mean, it's the nature of the beast, so to speak. We don't necessarily pay attention to what others have to say, but perhaps we should get used to listening to what others have to say. And third, and importantly, not assume that our preferences are going to be their preferences. Rather, to find mutually beneficial preferences that we can agree upon. So don't make assumptions, listen carefully, and make proposals that can be acceptable to both sides. Do not have very high expectations. Accomplish small steps, and you will accomplish much more than we have in the past.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. That's all good advice. I assure you, though, we do not take Oman for granted, and we do listen to them. Foreign Minister Busaidi and my colleague that I just mentioned right here in Washington have always provided their kind of honest and direct opinions on issues. I think we very much appreciate that Oman doesn't try to filter their messages to us. They tell us exactly how they feel, and I think that's useful. I think in diplomacy, it really is having the straight lines of communication that have really allowed us to do the things we have achieved that we both mentioned. And it's because of that ability that we can talk as friends and as nations that have nearly like a 200-year relationship. So thank you for those comments, and I look forward to doing all I can over the years ahead to further build on our already strong relations.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you.
I think Mr. Arta has a question next. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. I just wanted to, first of all, thank you for an amazing presentation and talk. I think everybody learned a lot. Thank you to Dr. Kéchichian and to also the Sultan Qaboos Center for putting this together. I run a Washington, D.C. realist think tank, which is focused on peaceful coexistence and a realist sort of view of politics and international affairs. And we are very committed to trying to advance the cause of neutrality. And for that reason alone, I've had a long-term interest in Oman, and very happy to also learn of the work of Dr. Anthony and Dr. Al Khalili. And you guys all have friends here at IPD moving forward. I just wanted to raise one question, which is, the world has changed. We are in a great transition, and the world no longer appreciates outside of the West, outside of America, a kind of a "you're with us or against us" attitude. You're not in a non-alignment movement anymore, but a multi-alignment. And I was just in Saudi Arabia, and this was, to my surprise, really also reflected in Riyadh. That we want to work with the Chinese, we want to work with the Iranians, we want to work with our regional neighbors, and we don't want hostility with anybody. So the question, I guess, that's in many people's minds is, how do we take that question of neutrality and peaceful coexistence, the modus vivendi, how do we extend that from just sort of a non-Western question and make it something that's more understandable, recognized, acknowledged, appreciated in Washington and in the larger West. Because I still feel, based on our work, that neutrality is a kind of a not so accepted word, if to put it politically. But I think I'm curious to hear what Dr. Kéchichian, you think about how we can make neutrality into a pillar of a new world order, a pillar of how U.S. foreign policy should look into not just the Middle East, but also the larger world that's populated by new powers and new nodes of power. Thank you.
That's an excellent question as well. I'm an academic by training. I'm not a policy wonk, even though I work at the Rand corporations for 9 years of my life. We live in a post World War II era, and now, as you have said correctly, we are now in a new order that is not clear, that is emerging in front of our eyes. Except for Switzerland and perhaps Austria, I cannot think of many neutral countries around the world. And neutrality is an ideal that will increasingly be practiced. But frankly speaking, it is very difficult to assume that the majority of countries of the world are going to remain neutral on the key issues. Let me give you a couple of examples. If you're a European and you're sitting in Madrid, or you're sitting in Paris and you see the war in Ukraine, obviously it's very difficult for you to remain neutral because it's on the European continent. You go on the other side of the world. If you're in South Korea, in Seoul, South Korea, and you have a neighbor in North Korea that is perpetually threatening to invade the country, then you have a different perspective. Neutrality for South Korea will not be manageable, at least for the foreseeable future. So therefore, neutrality is an ideal. In the Middle East, in the Arab world, the question is not of neutrality, but of positive neutrality. I would add positivity to it, that we have to be grown-ups, really. The world in the post-World War II era, with the creation of the United Nations and the institutions of multilateralism and so on, had reached a level of maturity that increasingly we are seeing now wither at the proverbial vine, if you would like. We have to refine this maturity. That's why I added positive to your neutrality idea, which I like very much. But I want to emphasize that we need a lot more emphasis on countries like Oman are interested in positivity. They want to improve. They want to change internally. They want to create wealth. We as Westerners, who are the champions of the creation of wealth, I mean, after all, we literally invented all of these economic systems under which we live right now. So therefore, it is our duty, our responsibility to also accept the fact that others would like to have creation of wealth and development and prosperity for their populations. We have to encourage that. The more we do, the less tensions there will be, and there will be positive neutrality all around. I hope so.
I hope so. I think if you want to add more to the word positive neutrality, I guess sometimes it gets confused for inactivity. And that is not neutrality. Oman.
That's not what I'm talking about.
I know, exactly. Oman was there since the Camp David Accords. Oman was there with the two-state solutions. Oman was there with Yemen resolutions. Oman was there with trying to reach out to modus operandi with Iran. Oman was there with Iraq. So yes, it's neutrality, but it is not inactivity. It's exactly as Professor Kéchichian is saying, it is a positive form of neutrality. I don't know if we have one more question, and then I guess it is time to wrap this up.
I think we have one more question from Ms. Sabra Al-Houthi, Deputy Chief of Mission at the Embassy of Oman. Ms. Sabra, you can ask your question, please.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Can you hear me? Okay. This is Sabra Al-Houthi. I'm chargé d'affaires of Sultanate of Oman Embassy in DC. I have no question, to be honest. Just I would like to thank Dr. Duke as well, Dr. Al Khalili, and especially Dr. Joseph for this valuable and informative lecture, to be honest. I'm impressed with your knowledge about Oman and your passion as well. And also, I hope to meet you in person in the future in other occasion in Sultan Qaboos Cultural Center. I hope this year as well. And also want to say thanks to David for his kind words. And I totally agree with you that we are working together very well for strengthening our bilateral relationship. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sabra. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Dr. Joseph Kéchichian, this was brilliant. This was more than I even expected, even knowing you and having read your work. You speak with such passion and dignity, frankly. We are grateful to you. I must, before I say goodbye to everyone, thank my staff. They have worked day and night to make this happen, and especially to change things from the center to make it here right now as this virtual reality, as we call it. I hope to see you, inshallah, and I hope you will come again, Dr. Joseph Kéchichian, and I hope we will have you at the center and
I hope so
probably
too.
expand on the same subject again.
Thank you so much. There was a lot more to be said. I appreciate the kind invitation. I want to thank the kind remarks that you and Dr. Anthony at the beginning offered. I also want to thank the staff members, Hiba, Halima, and Walid, who helped me set up with this computer so that
And
I can
Betty,
talk to you. I very much appreciate the invitation and look forward to visiting you in person, inshallah, soon.
inshallah, inshallah. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone. And
Thank you.
have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. David. Anthony Duke. There is he. Thank you. Thank you, sir.